Hello, this is Manda Codigo. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm gonna show you how to run a React frontend and FastAPI backend in Docker containers. Docker is kinda software that allows you to run your application in separate environments. These Docker containers contain everything your applications need to be run, like runtime, code, libraries and dependencies. You can think about containers like these are lightweight virtual machines that allows you to build, ship and run your applications seamlessly across different computing environments. That was a brief introduction to the topic, so now let's get started and dive into code. First we have to create a folder structure. We start from creating backend directory and then inside of it we create another folder called app that will contain a source code of our application and will be copied inside Docker container. In this project we don't need any external dependencies apart from Docker, but I will install them locally to make my IDE not complain about missing libraries. Feel free to follow the video. We'll need FastAPI, obviously, and UVcorn, an ASCII server that will serve our FastAPI application. If you install packages locally, it's good to keep them in separate virtual environment like I have. Once we have all requirements installed, we can list them using pip freeze command, and as you can see on the screen, they are all listed. Let's be smart and redirect its output to separate file in backend app directory, namely requirements.txt. Like I said before, the app directory will be copied later into Docker container, so now we have the same requirements for local and Docker environments. Let's dive right into the code. In our main.py file, we begin by importing the necessary modules from FastAPI. Here, we import FastAPI to create our application. Next, we instantiate our FastAPI application. Now, let's define some sample user data that our API will serve. In order to do that, we create a list of dictionaries representing users' data, each containing an ID and an email address. With our data set up, it's time to define our API endpoint to retrieve the list of users. Here, we use the app.getDecorator to specify the HTTP method get and root/API/users/ for our endpoint. We also define the response model to ensure the expected data structure. Now, let's import an CORS middleware to enable cross-origin resource sharing. Next, we have to configure CORS middleware to allow requests from a specific origin. We specify that requests from HTTP localhost port 3000 are permitted, and we limit the allowed HTTP method to get. And there you have it. We've written a simple server in FastAPI to serve a list of users. But our journey doesn't end here. In the next part of our tutorial, we'll containerize our FastAPI application using Docker. Let's create a new file in backend directory called Dockerfile that will be used to create our Docker image for backend service. This instruction sets the base image for our Docker container, which is Python 3.10 Slim. This base image provides the necessary Python environment for running our FastAPI app. The Slim tag denotes a lightweight version of the image, optimized for reduced size and resource consumption. In the next step, we set the working directory inside the container to app. This is where our application code will be reside, providing organization and clarity. This line copies the requirements.txt file from our local directory into the app directory within the container. This file contains all the Python dependencies our FastAPI app needs to run. Using pip3, this instruction installs the Python dependencies listed in the requirements.txt file into the container. The no cache dir flag ensures no caching is used during installation process, promoting consistency. The next copy command copies the entire content of our local app directory into the app directory within the container. This includes our FastAPI application code, ensuring that all necessary files are available for running the application. We expose port 8000 within the container. This instruction is only for documentation purpose, telling that the container will listen for incoming requests on port 8000, the default port for FastAPI applications. Finally, this instruction specifies the command to run our FastAPI application using UVcorn. It starts the FastAPI app and listens on host 0000 and port 8000, allowing external access to the application. Now it's time to create our frontend part. Let's start by creating a new directory called Frontend in the next to the backend one. Then make sure that you have Node.js already installed in your local environment, because we are going to execute npx create react app command to create our React application. In order to achieve that, let's run the following command. The npx is a package runner tool that comes bundled with npm node package manager, which is a default package manager for Node.js. It may take a while, so I am speeding up the video. When the base React application is created, let's go inside Frontend directory and get rid of some files and code snippets that we are not gonna use. We start by importing React along with the useState and useEffect hooks, which are essential for managing state and performing side effects in functional components. We define a functional component called usersList. Inside this component, we use the useState hook to initialize a state variable users as an empty array. We use the useEffect hook to perform side effects, such as fetching data from an API when the component mounts. Within the useEffect hook, we make a GET request to HTTP localhost 8000 API users using the fetch API. We parse the JSON response and update the user state using the setUsers function. We handle any errors that occur during the fetch operation using the catch block. Inside the usersList component, we return JSX to render the list of users. We display a heading usersList. We render an unordered list containing list items for each user. We use the map function to iterate over the users array and generate a list item for each user. Each list item displays the user's ID and email address. We define another functional component called app, which serves as the main component of our application. Inside the app component, we simply render the user's list component. Finally, we export the app component as the default export of the file, making it available for use in the other parts of our application. In the next steps, we will make a Docker file for our React application. But first, let's create a Docker ignore file and add their node modules, because we don't want to copy them into our container. Now, let's create a Docker file for our React application. Beginning with the from instruction, we set the base image for our Docker container. which is Node.js version 14 Slim. Next, the workdir command establishes the working directory inside the container as app, where our application code will be reside. Using the copy command, we transfer the package.json and package.log.json files from our local directory on the host machine into the app directory within the container. With the run command, we execute npm install inside the container to install the dependencies specified in the package.json file. This ensures that all necessary Node.js modules are installed within the container environment. Subsequently, we use the copy instruction to transfer all the files from the app directory on our local machine into the app directory within the container. The expose command exposes port 3000 within the container, indicating that the container will listen for incoming connections on port 3000. Finally, with the cmd instruction, we define the default command to run when the container starts. Here, npm start initiates the execution of the Node.js application. These steps collectively construct a Docker image encapsulating our React application and its dependencies poised for execution within the container. Now, let's create Docker Compose file in our project root. This file will describe setup for running our Docker containers. Make sure that you have Docker already installed on your machine. The version directive specifies the version of the Docker Compose file format being used. Here, we are using version 3.8. The services section defines the services that make up the application. In this case, we have two services, Frontend and Backend. For the Frontend service, container name sets a custom name for the container to Frontend. Build specifies how to build the Docker image for the Frontend service. The context is set to the Frontend directory, indicating that the Docker file for the Frontend service is located here. Port section maps port 3000 on the host to port 3000 in the container, allowing access to the Frontend application. For the Backend service, it looks basically the same. Container name sets a custom name for the container to Backend. Build specifies how to build the Docker image for the Backend service. Also, context is set to the Backend directory, indicating that the Docker file for the Backend service is located there. Ports maps port 8000 on the host to port 8000 in the container, allowing access to the Backend application. In summary, this Docker Compose file defines two services, Frontend and Backend. Each service is configured with a custom container name, build instructions, and port mappings to enable communication between the host and the Docker containers, running the Frontend and Backend applications. Now, let's open up the terminal and execute Docker Compose app command to build and run our Docker containers. When command is executed, we can open up the browser and go under localhost 3000 to open our frontend application and check if it's up and running. User's data is displayed in the screen and we have our React frontend and FastAPI Backend run in Docker containers. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it helpful and see you in the next video.